Imagine a creature that can turn leaves into money, disguise itself as a teapot, and float through the air using, well, its anatomy. A creature that's part raccoon dog, part trickster god, and somehow still common sight outside your local ramen shop. Today, we're talking about the Tanuki. Welcome back, curious wanderers, to the Lorekeepers library, where strange tales and old stories come alive, whether they're hiding in the woods, lurking in the mist, or disguised as a kettle. Today we're looking at something a little different. This creature doesn't breathe fire, it doesn't guard treasure, it's not particularly evil, but it might sell you a sack of leaves and call it gold. Today we're heading to the misty mountains and cedar forests of Japan to meet the supernatural shapeshifter with a fondness for sake, practical jokes, and of all things, enormous testicles. This week's topic actually comes from a listener's comment, so shout out to Andy, who asked if we can explore a Japanese mythological creature. And honestly, it is a great call, because once you start looking into this little leaf-hatted trickster, it's a wild ride. Illusion magic, belly drumming, and a history that stretches from ancient shrines to Studio Ghibli. So, let's get into it. Let's start with the basics. What exactly is a tanuki? Well, in the most literal sense, the tanuki is a real animal. It's not mythological, not made up, and it's not a ghost with a good PR agent. The Japanese raccoon dog is a small, fox-like canid native to Japan. It looks a bit like a raccoon, but it's actually more closely related to foxes and dogs. They're shy, almost nocturnal, with round bodies, dark eyes, and a soft, slightly confused expression, as if they've just remembered they left the stove on. They waddle a little bit when they walk. They're omnivores, they den in the forest and fields. In short, they're a very real, grounded animal. But step sideways into the world of folklore, and the tanuki becomes something else entirely. In Japanese myth, the tanuki isn't just an animal, it's a yokai, a supernatural being. And as far as yokai go, it's one of the most enigmatic and even daring ones. Not quite a spirit, not quite a god, and certainly not a demon, but rather a creature that exists somewhere between nature and story. The folkloric tanuki is a shapeshifter, a trickster, a lover of sake and pranks, and playing the fool, though often with a purpose. It is a being that uses mischief as a mirror, showing us our own assumptions, our greed, our pride, not to hurt, but to reveal. And while some trickster figures around the world lean towards the chaotic or the cruel, your Lokis, your Nancys, the tanuki tends to come across as more as mischievous uncle than an outright menace. It might trick you, but it rarely means to harm you. It's a kind of creature who would borrow your shoes, replace them with identical ones a size too small, and then help you look for the missing pair over a cup of tea. Now, one of the tanuki's most famous traits is the ability to transform, not just into people, but objects, animals, and even landscapes. In some stories, they pose as monks or beautiful women. In others, they disguise themselves as trees or stone lanterns. There's even a tale of one becoming the moon. How it manages this magical feat? According to legend, it often places a leaf on its head. Why that works is anyone's guess. But folklore doesn't always have to explain its own logic, and that's half the charm. But beyond its abilities, the tanuki's personality is what makes it so beloved. It's not austere, or tragic, or terrifying. It's cheerful, bold, and a little silly. It drinks too much, gets carried away with its own schemes, and often ends up the butt of its own jokes. In the worlds of spirits that punish and haunt, the tanuki is a rare creature that prefers to play. And despite its magical status, the tanuki has also become deeply domestic. You'll find tanuki statues across Japan, outside shops, restaurants and bars, round-bellied and smiling, carrying a sake bottle and a promissory note, looking for all the world like they've just stumbled in from a good night out. They're symbols of good luck, prosperity and joyful mischief. Practical jokes, yes, but ones wrapped in charm. So when we ask, what is a tanuki? We're not just talking about an animal or a trickster or a myth. We're talking about something more subtle, a figure that blurs the boundary between the natural and the magical, a character that is somehow grounded and whimsical at the same time. And as we go deeper, you'll see that the Tanuki stories, while lighthearted, also carry reflections of human nature, society, and the way we make meaning out of the world around us. So coming up next, we're going to take a closer look at what the Tanuki looks like in folklore, and why those statues outside ramen shops have such a memorable anatomy. So now we know what the Tanuki is, let's talk about how one looks, because it's memorable. We're not just talking about the living, breathing animal anymore. That's the one that's trotting through the mountain underbrush, raiding compost bins and looking mildly confused about everything. We're now stepping into folklore, where the Tanuki takes on a visual identity of its own. If you've been to Japan or even browsed photos of the traditional inns or restaurants, you've probably seen one. A chubby ceramic figure that often standing outside a shop or tucked into a garden corner. It has a big grin, a bottle of sake, a wide straw hat, and yes, the anatomy that is hard to miss. That's a Tanuki, or at least the folkloric version. These statues aren't just whimsical decor, they carry a whole suite of meanings, 8 in fact, each tied to a specific part of the Tanuki's design. But rather than run down a checklist, let's walk through the statue together, so to speak. So let's start at the top. You'll notice the straw hat. It's not just for shade or for style, it represents protection, especially from sudden trouble. A little nod to the fact that life is unpredictable, and prepared Tanuki is a lucky one. Next are the eyes, big and round and slightly too curious for their own good. They symbolise awareness, clear judgment, a reminder that if you're going to fool others or avoid being fooled yourself, you better be paying attention. Now, in one paw there's usually a bottle of sake. And while it's true that the Tanuki have a reputation for overindulgence, its sake here is less more about drunken antics and more about conviviality. This is being friendly or liveliness. Generosity, the warmth of company. This is a creature that lives large and yes, also lives well. In the other paw, a scroll, or sometimes a little ledger, is meant to represent trust, or at least the idea of keeping one's promise. Even if the Tanuki's version of a promise is flexible at best, it's a playful contradiction, the trickster who wants to be believed. And then there's the belly, large and round. It speaks to boldness and calm. A Tanuki doesn't rush, it's comfortable in its own skin, literally, and trusts the things that will unfold as they're meant to. Supporting all the roundness is the tail, bushy and sturdy. It's a symbol of sturdiness, because behind the jokes and the mischief, there is a kind of grounding force. The Tanuki might bend the rules, but not drifting aimlessly. The smile, of course, is the most immediately charming feature. It's welcoming, it's disarming, that expression that says, yes, I might be about to play a prank on you, but you'll laugh too, eventually. And finally, yes, the most iconic and to some, the most bewildering detail of all, the exaggerated testicles. They're not just a punchline, though they have inspired many. In folklore, they are linked with financial luck and abundance. This idea actually traces back to the metalworkers in the Edo period, who used tanned Tanuki skins to wrap gold. The skin's stretchiness became a metaphor for expanding wealth, prosperity that could be stretched and shaped just like the stories themselves. Over time, the idea morphed into a visual symbolism, and eventually the kind of imagery that, let's be honest, is hard to forget. So while the folkloric Tanuki might look a bit absurd to the modern eye, every detail of the little statue carries meaning. It's a kind of a visual shorthand for everything the Tanuki represents. Joy, mischief, boldness, protection, charm, luck, and just a hint of the absurd. This is a spirit that doesn't float around the world, it waddles right through them, belly first and grinning, grounded in nature, but alive in story. So next we're going to deep dive into the magical toolkit, shapeshifting, illusion, and why a leaf on the head can turn a Tanuki into anything from a monk to a moon. So stick around, transformation and trickery is next up. Now shapeshifting might be the headline act when it comes to the Tanuki's magical toolkit, but it's only part of the story. In Japanese folklore, the Tanuki isn't just a trickster with a few costumes in the cupboard, it's more like a walking, grinning glitch in the Matrix. A creature with the power to twist perceptions, bend reality, and make you question everything from your surroundings to your own senses. And it doesn't always have to change itself to do it. Now the Tanuki can transform, that's part essential. Whether it's turning into a monk, a tea kettle, a seductive woman, or full procession of ghostly warriors, the Tanuki is an absolute show-off when it comes to mimicry. But what's fascinating is that its magical extends well beyond simple disguise. So let's start with the illusions. Tanuki are said to conjure entire environments, towns, temples, processions, banquets, all out of nothing. People have wandered into what they thought was a bustling village, only wake up next morning laying in a field with a pile of leaves where their wallet used to be. They've made bridges vanish, turned lanterns into floating skulls, and caused footsteps to echo through forests with no one around. It's not just visual illusions, it's sensory manipulation. The story suggests a kind of magic that goes straight for the nervous system. Auditory hallucinations, distortion in time, and dreams you can walk through. There's a wonderful, if slightly unnerving, tale of a man being invited into a lavish home by wealthy strangers, fed a full meal, given a drink and a song and dancing company. Though come next morning, he's found laying half naked in a muddy ditch with twigs in his hair and a shoe tied to his head. You have to wonder what lesson was being taught there, or if the Tanuki just found it funny. And while foxes, kitsune, are also shapeshifters in Japanese mythology, their magic is often sharp-edged, purposeful. Kitsune tend to work with a plan. Tanuki, they improvise. Their transformations are loose, playful, and often flawed in some small but telling way. A Tanuki might become a priest but forget to change its tail, or it might pose as a statue but sneeze when someone walks by. This isn't because they're lazy, it's because the magic is more about the effect than the execution. A Tanuki doesn't need to fool everyone forever, just long enough to teach a lesson, pull a prank, or enjoy the moment. It's less theatre and more street magic. And then there's the use of tools, because the Tanuki's powers aren't entirely innate. The most iconic, of course, is the leaf. You often see it placing a single leaf on its head before it transforms. This isn't just stage dressing, it's a kind of folk ritual, a signal that the shift is happening. Whether it's an object of power or simply part of the performance depends on who's telling the tale, but the act of placing the leaf has become shorthand for transformation in Japanese storytelling. It's the magician's flourish before the reveal. But it doesn't stop at the transformation. In some regions, Tanuki were believed to create sound illusions, false footsteps in empty streets, phantom music drifting through the mountains, temple bell ringing when no one's there to ring them. These aren't just distractions, they're meant to lure, to unsettle, to lead people off the path. Not with malice necessarily, but a kind of chaotic curiosity. Sort of, what would you do, the Tanuki seems to ask, if the world stopped making sense for a moment? And sometimes the answer is get tricked, but occasionally it's see something true. There are even stories of Tanuki producing illusions that reveal a person's inner self, making a greedy man believe he's lost everything or showing a kind woman her deepest wish. It's subtle magic, morality play meets practical joke, and through all of it, one thing remains clear. The Tanuki's power isn't about domination, it's about play. There's no empire being built, no master plan. The magic is personal, intimate and fleeting. It doesn't reshape the world, it gives you a little nudge, just enough to throw you off balance. And maybe, when the leaves settle, you leave a little wiser, or at least more cautious than you were before. A quick side path here. There's an old superstition that if a Tanuki beats on its belly under a full moon, it's summoning other spirits to a hidden gathering. In some versions, it's a celebration. In others, a ghostly council of forest tricksters are planning their next illusion. So either way, next time you hear drumming in the woods, maybe don't follow it. So coming up next, we're going to hit the stage proper where the Tanuki tales come to life. Trickster stories, moral fables, magical mishaps, and theatre-loving raccoon dogs with a flair for drama. So stick around for part 4, Trickster's Tales. So far we've talked about what a Tanuki is, and how it looks, and its perchance for shapeshifting. Now we're stepping into the real heart of it all, the stories, because folklore lives in the telling, doesn't it? In the details passed down over tea or scratched into the back of temple woodblocks or whispers on misty roads, and the Tanuki has got plenty of stories. Let's start with one of the most well-known, Bunbuku Chagama, the lucky tea kettle. In this tale, a poor tinkerer finds a Tanuki caught in the trap and moved by pity sets it free. That night, the Tanuki returns, not to repay him with gold or wishes, but by transforming itself into an iron kettle. "Sell me," it says, "and you'll have enough money to live on." The man does just that, trading the kettle to a nearby temple. But when the monks place it over a fire, the kettle sprouts legs, a tail, and a face of real discomfort. It hops off the coals, shrieking, and causes an absolute scene. Eventually, the man takes the kettle back, but instead of hiding or fleeing, the Tanuki makes him an offer. They'll go on the road together, a travelling act. The Tanuki will dance, transform, perform tricks, and they'll split the earnings. It's a partnership, not repayment. It's a gentle story, and one of the rare pieces of folklore where everyone seems to come out alright. There's no curses, there's no revenge, just two unlikely companions making a living off illusion. It's part parable and part vaudeville. But not all Tanuki tales are quite so wholesome. In parts of Japan, particularly Shikoku and parts of Honshu, you find much older, earthier stories, ones where the Tanuki rival one another, where grudges are held and illusions can get out of hand. Take the tale of Danzanburu Tanuki, boss of the Sado Islands. Danzanburu was said to be the most powerful Tanuki in the region, capable of conjuring entire marketplaces out of thin air, tricking greedy merchants into buying sacks of leaves disguised as gold, and even convincing samurai that their own homes were haunted. And yet, like many powerful tricksters, Danzanburu wasn't cruel. He wasn't above humiliating the proud or greedy, but he rarely harmed the innocent. In time, he became something of a folk hero, a local protector. People left offerings at his shrine well into the modern era, not to banish him, but to keep him on their side. A trickster with honour, if not exactly humility. Another well-loved figure is Shibaemon Tanuki of Awaji Island. Now Shibaemon had a theatrical streak. Legends say he loved kabuki so much he would disguise himself as a human just to sneak into performances. He and his wife would even host their own plays, Tanuki style, for the animals of the forest. But tragedy struck when he left the forest to see a play in the city. Disguised as a human, Shibaemon was mistaken for a spy and killed by guards. When the people of Awaji learned the truth, they were so moved by the Tanuki's passion and gentleness, they enshrined him as a protective spirit. Even today, some troops still offer prayers to Shibaemon before a performance. It is a rare story in folklore where the supernatural isn't exiled or destroyed, but embraced. The Tanuki is mourned, remembered, and given a seat in a theatre he loved. And then there are the cautionary tales, the kind that begin innocently but end with a lesson. One such story tells of a boastful Tanuki who tricks a farmer into thinking his rice fields are cursed. The farmer, desperate and frightened, gives up his land. The Tanuki celebrates too loudly and is overheard bragging by a local priest. The priest, not one for games, tricks the Tanuki back, conjuring an illusion so powerful the Tanuki believes it has died and gone to the afterlife. In its panic, it renounces its tricks and becomes a temple guardian instead. The underlying message: there's always a bigger trickster. Tanuki tales are rarely black and white. They exist in shades of grey, wrapped in humour, charm, and the occasional moral gut punch. You'll find them humbling the arrogant, rewarding the kind, and often teaching lessons without needing to be cruel. Even when the stories end in chaos, they tend to leave you with a smirk. And through it all, one thing remains consistent: the Tanuki never takes itself too seriously. It can be clever, wise, and even noble at times, but it's also willing to fall flat on its face, laugh, and try again. And that is probably why it's lasted so long in the hearts of storytellers. You would think that a magical shape-shifting raccoon dog that conjures haunted villages out of thin air might have struggled in the modern world. That the industrial age with its trains, telegraphs, and Tokyo tower blocks might have squeezed the folklore right out of the Tanuki. But no, the Tanuki didn't disappear, it went mainstream. If you've ever walked through a Japanese neighbourhood, rural or urban, you've probably met one. A squat, wide-eyed statue sitting outside restaurants, izakaya, and even convenience stores. Pot-bellied, leaf on head, comically large testicles, and always smiling. That's Shigaraki Tanuki, the modern mascot form of the creature, and it's everywhere. These ceramic statues trace their popularity back to the potters of Shigaraki near Kyoto, who began producing them en masse during the Showa era. Their big break came in the 1950s, when Emperor Hirohito visited the region and was greeted by lines of tanuki statues waving flags. The image stuck: cheerful, humble, deeply Japanese. And from then on, the tanuki became a symbol, not just of good fortune, but of national charm. And while the statues are whimsical, they aren't hollow nostalgia. They are quite reminders of old beliefs embedded into daily life, part folklore, part brand ambassador. In fact, in many ways, the tanuki is some kind of soft marketing tool. Walk past a ramen shop with a tanuki by the door, and there's an unspoken promise of warmth, humour, and maybe a little mischief, but no pretense. You'll also find tanuki mascots used by sake breweries, souvenir shops, and roadside stations, anywhere a little rustic hospitality is needed. They invite trust and indulgence in equal measures. Now then, when it comes to their pop culture footprint, few works have embraced the tanuki mythos as boldly or as heartbreakingly as Pom Poko. Released in 1994 by Studio Ghibli and directed by Isao Takahata, Pom Poko is part folklore celebration and part environmental tragedy. It tells the story of a community of tanuki whose forest is being destroyed by Tokyo's relentless suburban sprawl. Faced with extinction, they turn to their ancient shape-shifting abilities to fight back, creating illusions, impersonating humans, even staging ghostly parades in an attempt to scare the city folk off. And in classic Ghibli fashion, it swings between humour and sorrow with disarming ease. One moment you're watching the tanuki float through the skies with their testicles stretched into parachutes. Yes, that happens. And the next, you're confronted with the quiet, brutal reality of wildlife being displaced by concrete and steel. The film doesn't sanitize the folklore. The tanuki in Pom Poko are goofy and crude, but also deeply spiritual, connected to the land and culture. They chant, they mourn, they celebrate, and despite their magic, they are heartbreakingly mortal. By the end, many have died, faded into human disguises, or vanished into legend. It's not just a film about animals, it's about transformation in all forms. It's not just magical transformation, but societal changes, environmental loss, and cultural survival. The tanuki don't win, but they persist. They adapt. Some take human form and live among us. And in a bittersweet resolution, the film echoes the real-world fate of the tanuki myth, no longer feared or revered, but still present, smiling quietly from our shop fronts, cartoons, and corner shrines. The tanuki also shows up in video games. Super Mario Bros. 3 gave us the iconic tanuki suit, and Animal Crossing brought us Tom Nook, a shrewd, sleepy-eyed capitalist with a surprisingly soft heart. While he doesn't wield illusions or float on leaves, he embodies the familiar tanuki blend of cunning, charm, and hospitality. And in the everyday world, you still hear the regional stories, local tanuki legends whispered in countryside towns, roadside shrines dedicated to shape-shifting guardians, and elders who swear they once heard strange laughter in the woods. The tanuki may no longer rule the forest, but has never really left it either. It takes new forms. Its mascot, meme, landlord, lucky charm. Its magic lives on not in spells, but in symbols. A creature of folklore that learned how to thrive in a country where spirits now ride the subway. And that's where we leave our leaf-hatted friend, and brings us to the end of this week's journey into the curious world of the tanuki, a creature of contradictions, transformation, and unexpected wisdom. We've met the folklore trickster with a leaf on its head, wandered through its shape-shifting antics, and watched it evolve from forest spirit to front porch mascot. Whether it's casting illusions in the Edo area legends, or smiling quietly outside your local ramen shop, the tanuki reminds us that all magic wears a serious face. Sometimes it wears a big belly and a grin. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like and subscribe, or even leave a comment. It really helps more curious minds find their ways to us and keeps the stories flowing. You can also join the growing community of listeners by becoming part of the Lorekeepers library. Follow us on your favourite podcast platform or connect on social media. Share your thoughts, send in your own folklore finds, or just come to say hi. And thank you for tuning in. I'm Kriss. Until next time, keep exploring the world with wonder.